The TeraFlex JL 1.5-inch spacer lift combines easily installed spacers with the factory springs. The kit contains all the necessary parts and hardware for installation. The rear spacers are 1.5 inches tall, and the front spacers will differ in height depending on whether you drive a 2-door or a 4-door. This is because of weight differences between the two types of vehicles. We will show the installation on the passenger or right side of the vehicle, but both sides can be done at the same time. Raise the vehicle in the air and remove the wheels and tires. Disconnect the sway bar link at the axle end and swing the sway bar up and out of the way. Remove the bolt connecting the front track bar to the axle. Detach the bracket connecting the brake lines to the front lower control arms. Remove the axle actuator plug by pushing in the locking tab. Remove any zip ties or plastic clips connecting the line to the upper control arm. Disconnect the breather hose on the axle. On the Rubicon, there is a locker actuator plug that you will also need to disconnect. Loosen, but do not remove the control arm bolts. The front upper control arms have a heat shield on the frame end. Move the heat shield out of the way or remove it if you want to. Support the axle and remove the bolt on the axle end of the front shock. Raise the vehicle or lower the axle until the springs are loose. Be aware of the brake lines, ABS lines, and any other wires. As much as possible, avoid stretching these. Remove the spring and then remove the spring isolator. There are 2 locating pins on the spring isolator. These fit into corresponding holes on the front spacer. Likewise, the front spacer has 2 locating pins on top, which match the 2 holes on the spring bucket. After the TeraFlex spacer and factory spring isolator are properly aligned, set the spring back into place. Be sure the bottom of the spring matches up with the spring index. Lower the vehicle or raise the axle back up into place. The spacer and the spring isolator can fall out of position. Make sure they align correctly. Reconnect the shock and the brake line bracket on the control arm. Reattach the sway bar links to the axle. Reconnect the breather hose, axle actuator plug, and any plastic retainers you removed. It is alright to reinsert the bolt for the track bar while the vehicle is in the air, but do not tighten the bolt until the vehicle is back on the ground. Moving to the rear, loosen but do not remove the control arm bolts. Remove the emergency brake cable bracket located on the vehicle body directly above the rearmost driveline joint. This bracket will not be reinstalled. Disconnect the track bar at the axle. Support the axle and remove the bolts connecting the lower end of the shocks to the axle. Disconnect the sway bar links at the axle and move the sway bar up out of the way. Detach the brake line bracket from the axle. Lower the axle and remove the spring and spring isolator. To install the rear spacer, set the bolt into place using the slotted washer. Install the spacer and use the small washer and nut to keep the spacer in place. As you tighten the nut, make sure the locating pin aligns with the hole in the upper spring mount. Torque the nut to 15 foot-pounds. Align the locating pin on the isolator with the corresponding hole on the spacer. The spring isolator has an index to align the spring. Be sure you do this before setting the spring into place. Raise the axle to hold the spring in place. Reconnect the sway bar links, shocks, and brake line brackets. Insert the track bar bolt, but do not tighten until the vehicle is back on the ground. Replace the wheels and tires, and once the vehicle is back on the ground, torque all the control arm bolts and track bar bolts to factory specifications.